After a successful decade run as a featured documentary, Eyes of the Mothman is now a podcast containing bonus information and, for the first time ever, the complete, unedited field interview tapes with eyewitnesses, experts, and those who were directly impacted by the Mothman incidents that occurred in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1966 and 1967. Although this podcast is meant to act as a historical record and an archive of the events that transpired, all material contained here is not for reproduction without the written consent by the copyright holder, Redline Studios, Incorporated. Welcome to episode 5 of the Eyes of the Mothman, the podcast. This is our interview with Jay Miller. He is a professor of American Indian Studies at Ohio State University. I remember him being a super nice guy, just anything we needed, he would help with. He was also one of the early interviews in the film. I remember we interviewed him outside. Same thing, just noisy campus, big noisy campus. And he was really there to speak on Thunderbirds, the legend of Thunderbirds, their role in Native American studies and lifestyle, the Battle of Point Pleasant, and the curse of Chief Cornstalk. What do you guys, any memories of Jay Miller? Besides his wardrobe, Anastasia?
I remember him being a nice guy, and I know that he was, he liked Justin Masler, because I remember him like making jokes with Justin Masler.
Really?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
I don't remember that.
I remember it.
Yeah, Justin was our fourth crew member who, had a bit of an eccentric personality and kind of a goofball. And you know what? It makes sense. Jay probably gravitated to him because Justin was like the prototypical like dumbass college student at the time in terms of and he's probably been just used to dealing with those type of people all day in school, not paying attention, not listening to what he's trying to teach them. When we interviewed him, he had that very
the bolo
nice
tie, yeah,
like that very nice. What is that, like a teal blue?
Yeah, it was a teal blue bolo thing, and I think he had like a. Did he have a leather vest on?
He had like a yellow vest. Yeah, looked great. The thing is, sometimes you go to interview people, and I always think it's a little rude to like try to dictate their wardrobe. You always tell them like, you don't want a shirt with patterns because it can moire and look bad on camera. But I've had that blow up in my face a few times. I remember one time on another project, we interviewed like a fairly good celebrity. And so like the last thing I'm going to do is tell a celebrity what to wear for an interview. But I remember we showed up to the interview and he was wearing like a sloppy, wrinkled shirt with like spilled paint all over it. And I just remember thinking like, is he going to change? And he's like, I'm ready for my interview. And I was like, oh shit, So it can blow up in your face if you don't have that discussion. But most people I think know I'm going to be interviewed, so they look presentable. And I thought it was pretty cool that Jay showed up.
And he was nice enough to take off his holster.
No, he dressed for the occasion. He was talking about Native American history and all that, and he was dressed exactly for the occasion.
Those little details, I love when people do that. It makes you look like you did a better job.
Well, now you remember who is that guy? He's the guy with the bolo and the leather vest. You remember.
One thing that also Jay spoke about was the Battle of Point Pleasant, which, is another interesting facet to the history of Point Pleasant and the Mothman, which is that the first battle of the American Revolution essentially took place in this town, which, again, the only reason that's in the film is because it's tied to Cornstalk. Cornstalk was in that battle and died in that battle, and then so people automatically associate the curse with Cornstalk. But I just think that's such an interesting historical fact. Like, we spend a little bit of time explaining that in the movie, just because it's also it's a fascinating part of history that I'm sure a lot of people don't know about.
My whole take when you hear these professors talk about history, and you just start to get the idea of how messy history is and how untidy the stories really are once you get down to it. If this is considered the first battle of the American Revolution, I don't know, but you're certainly not taught that. But you have all these skirmishes for all these different reasons, for territory, for revenge, and all of these different reasons. And when people talk about the Boston Massacre, it's a bunch of hooligans who got into a fight earlier in the day that led into the night, and they were drunk and all this. When you really get down to it, it's like that. And when you get down to Cornstalk's son getting killed, beaten, He was killed with, I think, a hammer or something like that, trying to escape out of a chimney, and that they killed the guy's family earlier in the week. And I mean, you start to get all the ideas of the savagery and the wildness of the West, and the frontier, and where does it stop, and then when you get these armed soldiers of the British fighting with the native population and fighting with colonials, it's when you start talking to historians, they're the ones who really know the ins and outs of all the messy details, and that's what makes it real. That's what makes it fascinating.
To me, that was the other thing with Cornstalk. Well, some of these people would be like, he absolutely, his last dying breath was, "I curse Point Pleasant." Like that's hearsay and a legend, and it's in our movie and it's interesting. But to me, knowing the nitty gritty of how he died, the fact that he was basically betrayed, murdered, unarmed, that to me is enough to be an imprint on the region of just the idea of like bad karma. All of these people too. One thing we're not talking about is, when you do these interviews, it just makes your life so much easier when people know how to speak in a soundbite, because at the end of the day, you're trying to not be long-winded. You're trying to be short and to the point with some of the things you're looking to discuss. And when you do it in a documentary like this, where it's talking head documentary, it's essentially one interview after another. Listening to one person talk for 2 hours is boring, but when you can chop up and make a collective story out of 20 interviews, that's when it really works. And so people really have to speak in a certain manner for that to work.
Well, let me ask you a question. When you first approached these people on the phone or email, when you were asking them, I mean, obviously, if you're dealing with celebrities, these people, okay, they might say to themselves, "What do you want from me? What are you trying to get? You're trying to get free content for whatever. Are you going to put me in a bad light? Who is this for?" And sometimes they have to go through these press junkets where they have to do interview after interview, like literally for 12 hours a day, sitting in a chair, being asked the same questions and answering the same things, and they get a little testy, and they get a little, it's old school for them. It's not fun. It's not interesting. It's not new. But when you contacted these people who might not have been given the same type of respect that a celebrity might have, and the same type of care, when you contacted them, what was their initial response? Were they, "Sure, let's do it, or were they kind of like, "What is this about?" Like, how did you approach them when you
There's always a back and forth. There's definitely a process to where, it's an initial email, then a phone call. I would say on average, it's about 5 correspondences back and forth, no less, just to, explain to them, what are you doing, who you are, why you're doing it, what this is about. I try to be as accommodating as possible, because all of this stuff, you're always asking for someone's time. You're asking for someone's expertise. You are asking them to essentially trust you to represent them a certain way. I always try to reassure them, depending on who it is. Like, we talked about Carolyn Harris a few episodes ago. One of the things I assured her is like, I'm not going to make you look like an idiot. I'm not going to, I just try to put myself in their shoes going, I like my job. I get paid well at my job. I don't want to get fired from my job if I end up in some YouTube viral, I saw a Mothman
right.
thing, and they look, presented in a negative light, or maybe in an uneducated way. So I tried to always be honest with them, but just explain the whole process. Take nothing for granted. There are no stupid questions. Make them feel comfortable. Make them feel like I'm not overseeing them, but that we're working together. And like, hey, if you have any idea, here's my idea, here's my movie. What are your thoughts? What are your honest opinions?
And how quickly in that correspondence did they trust you?
I think pretty quickly. I mean, I can almost relate it to, one of my first jobs, like one of my night jobs when I was going to school, I was working as a security guard and a bouncer at music venues here in the city. And when you do that job, you start to learn people real quick. You see, 2,000 people a night, and you start to pick up on like who's lying to you, who's being honest. Like someone wants to get by you through a gate, and they go, I think I left my wallet over there. And you could tell, like, is that person being honest, or is someone just lying to get past you? And so all of those things you start to pick up on, like how to read body language, how to read people who are sincere, who are liars. And so, I just try to keep that in mind with all these people and try to just approach them in that same way to earn their trust. And I would say most people, it's like it's a progression. You have one initial phone call followed up with an email, another phone call. And I'd say there's really, over the last 20 years of doing this, trying to get people to interview, talk to me about any subject matter. And the hundreds of people I've talked to, there's been maybe like one or two that just didn't do an interview, whether it was like a discomfort thing or it just didn't work out. So I think there's an initial trust right away, because if there wasn't, then there would never be a second call. And I just think it builds towards that. But for anyone listening to this who wants to get into this type of work, or who is interested in this stuff, everything matters. Details matter. If I send him an email where 9 out of the 20 things in the email are spelled incorrectly, or I'm using, there instead of there, that's going to be a red flag. I know it is for me. To someone out there going to go, well, this guy's not even proofreading his email to me. How good of a job is he going to do interviewing me? Everything is important. How you represent yourself, how you speak, and how you treat them. And so I always try to take all of that in mind when I'm trying to essentially ask someone to come do something like this. Jay Miller obviously can speak, and did speak, more about the details of such things as the Battle Point Pleasant. Here is his raw interview. Hopefully you enjoy it.
Let me know when you're ready. Okay, so can you just start by just tell me your name and spell it for me and your title at the university?
I'm Jay Miller, Jaymiller. I'm the coordinator of American Indian Studies at Ohio State University.
Professor Miller, can you tell me, are you familiar with Chief Cornstalk? If so, can you tell me a little bit about who he was?
Cornstalk was a leader of the Shawnee people, concerned mostly with domestic and civil affairs. But during the Battle of Point Pleasant, he was forced by his own people into taking a leadership role during the battle. His booming voice echoed during the course of the day, encouraging the Shawnee warriors for as long as they could hold out.
Tell me, how was Cornstalk viewed by his own people? How did they look at him? Did they look up at him, admire him?
Cornstalk was a wise, considerate, and just leader of his people, and that's the reputation he still has to this day. The fact that he suffered martyrdom just adds to his reputation. Cornstalk was held as a hostage, as was his son, by the American military. In Native society, the role of the hostage is a sacred one, in the sense that he is an intermediary between the opposing forces as well as the world of spirits and the world of ordinary mortals. It's a supercharged state. He is supposed to think nothing but good thoughts to add to the eventual solution to the problem, and to have him killed in that state was a huge catastrophe.
So we're just talking a little bit about, Native American people, what their makeup is, their morals, their beliefs. And Cornstalk was kind of at the high pedestal there of a man of respect, a man of honor, dignity. And unfortunately, his death was not it did not reflect the type of man he was. Unfortunately, he was kind of betrayed and murdered. Can you just talk a little bit about the unfortunate irony there of his death not?
It's in keeping with the character of Cornstalk that he submitted to the role of hostage by the American military. The role of hostage is a sacred state in Native society. He is someone who is supposed to only think good thoughts to the eventual resolution of whatever the problem is. He is an intermediary between both the hostile sides of the conflict, as well as the spirits and the mortals who are involved. And to have him killed in that state was a major catastrophe. And a bus.
Okay. Can you just reiterate just your last thought there about it's unfortunate that Cornstalk's death did not reflect the type of
to have Cornstalk killed while he was in the sacred state of hostage was a major catastrophe on all sides, but especially for the Shawnee. He was the hope for eventually working out some kind of compromise with the American forces, the forces of Virginia, who were the bad guys all the way through.
So I'm going to move on to some of the Thunderbird questions. Can you just tell me a little bit, for someone who doesn't know, tell me a bit about the Thunderbird legends that exist in Native American culture. Are these myth-based, or to the Native American people, are they more of a reality, more of a part of their belief system?
Birds have a special role to play in Native society because, like human beings, they have two legs. And generally, birds have more power and access to power than other beings because they fly. They actually live in 3 dimensions. In all Native societies, the eagle is a revered being, but there's also the sense that there's something larger, especially in the world of spirits and in the world of the world beyond the world that we can see. And so it's in that domain that Thunderbirds play a particularly important role. Now, in many cases, Thunderbirds also have a living embodiment on the West Coast. This is often the condor. And condors were all over the West Coast before DDT and development did them in. There's still a viable community in California, but they were up and down the West Coast. By the same token, tribal groups in Washington State, like the Makah, who resumed whaling a couple of years ago as a treaty guaranteed right, still have an active belief that there are Thunderbirds who live on the highest mountain in their area, who routinely hunted whales and fished them up from the ocean and then took them to the mountaintops to eat. In the case of many Native people in the Great Lakes, Thunderbird images, especially in porcupine quill, are embroidered on clothing as a prayer to the role of the Thunderbird in the great beyond, in the larger dimension.
It's almost reflected as, I don't know if it's the wrong term, but like a godly type entity?
No. Thunderbirds, I don't know anywhere where Thunderbirds are regarded as deities. They generally have 2 functions, and it's very much the same role that eagle has. It's the role of messenger between this world and the world of beyond and the deities of one kind or another. And the second is that of witness. When people make, especially burnt offerings, it is the Thunderbird who witnesses the final arrival of the smoke in the great beyond.
And you had brought up something interesting about Thunderbirds, tales of them scooping up whales and feasting on them. Can you
on the Pacific coast?
Can you tell me that story once again? It's been known that Thunderbirds
no, people believe that to this day that there are Thunderbirds that people don't ordinarily see in the Olympic Mountains of the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State. And in many cases, the faith continues because they have proof in the sense that there are fossils in the highest mountains. There are fossil bones in the highest mountains, and many Native people interpret those bones as the whales being petrified over the course of time. The whales that were eaten by the Thunderbirds. So for them, they have proof.
I'm going to ask you that question one more time, starting with the idea of proof. So we can start with something, many people argue that there actually is proof of Thunderbirds, and this is why.
Yeah. In the Northwest, the belief, especially among Nuchanuth people, that Thunderbirds continue to hunt whales, take them to the highest mountains, their faith is confirmed by the proof of fossil bones and whatnot in the high mountains. Of course, Western science has another interpretation, which is the sea bottom brought up into the mountain peaks or turned into the mountain peaks over the course of time. But for Native people who don't have this notion of plate tectonics, the bones are there as a product of whale feasts.
Right. So, even though we're talking about some modern day beliefs of Thunderbird, I had mentioned earlier, I think you heard, there's actually been quite a large amount of instances where people will see a bird that kind of is not supposed to be, in this time period. They'll see a massive bird does that add a little bit to the credibility that, it's not 100% folklore, it's not 100% legend, because, throughout time, even up until present day, there's been sightings of these giant birds?
The occasional appearance of these large birds in particular areas may in fact have a basis in biology, but it certainly goes further to reinforcing the undeniable. Let me rephrase that. The reports of these big birds in repeated instances in various locations goes to reinforce the faith in the birds. It may in fact have an existence in biology and reality. Science doesn't know everything. I'll just leave it that way.
That's fine.
All right.
Thunderbirds to the Native American people, something that's embraced by them, or are they feared almost? Are they almost? Is there a fear acquainted with the Thunderbird?
I know of no one who categorized Thunderbirds as bad or fearful. They're very powerful beings, and you have to be respectful in their presence or in what you think to be their presence. So there's the proper word, I think, is awe. People are in awe of Thunderbirds. And that's, I think, why they continue to use the image in clothing and on objects that they want to have protected.
A lot of legends and myths stem from something that's real. In your own opinion, do you think this is kind of closely related, or is it not even really that, where it's just, a Thunderbird legend is more of an extension of this respect for the large bird, which in Native American culture is a symbol of some of these things? Is that, do you think, where this comes from?
Yeah, Native people are astute observers of nature, and always have been. But they also believe that there's something over and above what you can see, feel, touch. So, they know eagles, they know falcons intimately, they know condors or new condors. They certainly still recall that there were condors, but they also think there's something beyond. And Thunderbirds, they have very graphic descriptions of what Thunderbirds are like, and treat them just like any other biological species.
Great. So it doesn't rock. Are we good? Okay, good. Can you tell me a little bit about other artifacts and information from the culture of Native Americans that speak of the Thunderbirds? Things like totem poles, pottery, cave paintings, things like that. That I think Helen had touched on, some cave artwork. Can you just tell me a bit about some of these things that it's been documented through their craft?
Art. All over North America, there are images of Thunderbirds. Some of the oldest are probably in rock art, pecked or painted onto cliff faces. Clothing, I've already mentioned, where Thunderbirds appear as a protector on people's personal clothing, both men and female, both men and women. Often ritual objects like drums will have Thunderbirds on them. In the Northwest, where this belief in the Thunderbird hunting whale is still so active, those Thunderbirds, or many of those Thunderbirds, are family crests and appear on totem poles. And often there will be, in the clutches of the huge Thunderbird at the top of the pole, a whale, but it's so small that most people just think it's a fish, but it's actually a whale. I think of poles all over British Columbia that have Thunderbirds on them.
Are totem poles, just out of curiosity, totem poles, most that I've seen, the top kind of icon is usually a bird figure. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's often raven, because raven made the world for many people in the Northwest. And
give me a brief description of that.
Each tribal group in the Northwest has its own style of totem poles, but each figure on a totem pole represents a story which is associated with a particular place, with particular foods, resources, stones for making tools. And many people in the Northwest just call totem poles their deeds to the land, and their rights to the land. And Thunderbirds are one of the real powerful beings that many families in the Northwest claim as an ancestral figure, a totem of one kind or another.
Great.
Generally to food, to marine resources, to ocean foods.
Yeah, great. That's interesting. Something I never knew. Exactly.
Yeah, most of my publications are in the Northwest.
Within, Native American culture and belief, it's kind of stereotypical, but a lot of times, in films and things you see, like, it's the scary Indian shaman doing curses and rituals. What's the reality of it? Is this based on any reality? Things like curses, are these things that are kind of misrepresentations of part of that culture, or is it just something that is a part of the Native American culture? It's things like curses specifically.
Curses appear in other parts of the world. They're very important in Africa, traditional Africa, and of course occur in European tradition. Shakespeare has curses in various of his plays, but a curse is not a Native American concept. There are ways of doing in your enemies. It involves sorcery, witchcraft, bad thoughts of one kind or another. But curses seem to have really come home to settle in the Midwest. Cornstalk has a curse associated with him. Tecumseh, the other great Shawnee leader, is associated with a curse on U.S. presidents. And it is a bit uncanny that almost every Ohio president died prematurely in office. And in the case of William Henry Harrison, he actually had fought with Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa. So there are a bunch of coincidences that people have interpreted in the African-European mode as curses. What happens is not attributed to a curse, but it is attributed to divine retribution. These people are getting what they deserve. And it's impersonal. It's not attached to any one person like Tecumseh or Cornstalk. But in fact, the concept of the divine is dealing with improprieties in the universe. Let me
Talk about there's an overall, kind of a justice to.
Yeah, exactly. There's the sense that the world itself seeks justice in the long term, and it's that justice which often will be for Europeans interpreted as curses and as by Native people as retribution, finally getting their own.
Can we piece that together again? That statement. I just want to clarify it a bit. Maybe can we start with in the Native American community, it's more the idea of a curse. It's not so much what the stereotypical meaning is, but more of a universal type of worldly justice, a kind of redemption or.
For Native Americans, there is no concept of a curse on any kind of personal level. There is a sense of divine retribution or the world seeking justice on the whole, in the long term. Curses are really an old world European and African phenomenon.
What type of things are usually attributed to something like of a curse? What are usually like the consequences? What are usually you can even reiterate the thought of just things coming back to you, karma.
Yeah. In the general understanding of curse, it is a personal attack and a.
That's good. That's a good way to start.
Yeah. The notion of a curse affects the individual, often leads to the death of an individual. It's much personal. It's couched in very American terms of, you are responsible for your own actions and you will reap the fruits of that. You will suffer the consequences of what you do.
Right.
And Native people don't have that personal sense. It is a law. It is in the sense of the group, in the sense of the community that things are played out, not in terms of individuals. So in fact, Cornstalk wouldn't have been responsible for any kind of retribution. It would have been his whole family which was a family of leaders, both men and women.
Cornstalk was betrayed and murdered in this area. So is it kind of, appropriate that there has been some tragedies and atrocities? Just wait for that plan to go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Native people tend to think in terms of community and in terms of tribe, and that means territory, land. Anything that they're concerned with, or what they're most concerned with, is their home territory. Any ceremonies they do, any prayers they offer affect that area. So people who did the Shawnee wrong will most suffer consequences within the boundaries of the Shawnee homeland. That's why the premature death of so many Ohio presidents is particularly telling to Shawnee people.
Can you tell me a little bit about symbolism in Native American culture in terms of birds? You've already mentioned quite a bit about it, but more so, I think, a lot of people that often blame things on Cornstalk, specifically involving the specific case that I'm dealing with, where there was a giant bird apparition kind of scene. A lot of people point that to Cornstalk because they feel that, a giant bird would kind of make sense that would be a manifestation of a form of justice.
For Native people who are astute observers of nature, they are already well aware of the role of birds, especially predator birds, carnivores, fierce attack, appearing out of nowhere as a I'm trying to get to sudden and I can't. Appearing out of nowhere with no warning. So all of those attributes are taken and played upon with the role of Thunderbird as an avenger. But it's clearly based in biology. It's based on what people see and appreciate in the natural world. But also the fact that birds live in multiple dimensions.
Yeah, I like that notion of the bird representing the Avenger. Can we talk about that again? What can a Thunderbird represent in terms of justice and things like that?
Well, the Thunderbirds, like eagles, like condors, are predators. They kill to eat. Don't take more than they need as a fact of nature. So this is to have a Thunderbird as an avenger emphasizes justice rather than wanton killing.
Birds can, in Native American culture, can represent several things. Can you just run through some of the list of the symbolism of what birds can represent to the Native American?
Well, throughout North America, birds have this role of messenger because they too are two-legged like human beings, but they function in the air, on the land, in the water, and presumably beyond the sky in whatever's up there. They also have the role of witness because they're keen observers themselves, and then they have a whole series of attributes that Native people will respect by taking like talons and using them as ornaments or decorations. They'll take feathers at all times and use them for fans, hair decorations, always with a sense of imbuing themselves with some of the attributes, especially the flight attributes of birds. Beaks. I mean, I can go on and on and on.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, just we're doing good on time.
Yeah, great.
We won't go longer than
Good.
20 minutes.
Yeah, I know. I do.
I just want to talk, even though I know you're not completely savvy on Point Pleasant, Battle of Point Pleasant. I just want to talk just in terms of what you do know about that.
The whole Point Pleasant was the flashpoint out of a series of disagreements between the Native people on the Ohio side of the river and Virginians on the south side of the river. At this point, all of it was Virginia, eventually became Kentucky and West Virginia and all of that. But Virginia goes back to an imperial colony. So dare I say, they've always been high-handed in one way or another. And in fact, we're always willing to take more than their fair share. The fact that many of these people, while they were Church of England, Episcopalian, Anglican on the coast, in the interior, many of them were Scots Protestants who had a real chip on their shoulder. And the Native people were subject to all kinds of abuse, fueled by their particular Christian sense. But Native people were treated badly because Scots Presbyterians had a particular outlook on life that denigrated Native people.
Things like maybe power and consumption were a part of this. The kind of continually.
It was pretty much land based, land fueled. People, all these ne'er-do-wells, all these hardscrabble people were desperate for land anywhere, anytime, and Indian people were in the way. The fact that Cornstalk tried to act with dignity and reserve just made him much more a target for the Virginians of the time. But they were taking on Pennsylvanians. They were taking on, anyone who didn't share their particular greed.
Can you just describe maybe some of the sights, the sounds of what a battle of that time?
Well, the Virginians were in British military formation. They were in there were frontiersmen, but there were also guys in military uniforms marching in strict order. And the Shawnee notion was they were going to make a lightning attack on the column moving up the Kanawha River and scatter them. And the timing of the Shawnees was not the best. So in fact, it ended up being a skirmish that went on all day. It wasn't particularly devastating in terms of casualties. The battles in Ohio, which wiped out the first and second U.S. armies, were much more devastating. But it scattered the Shawnees and enabled the huge amount of casualties on the part of the Virginians too. But the Virginians had reserves that they could call upon to reinforce their lines, and the Shawnees didn't. So the Shawnees retreated back across the Ohio into Ohio.
I'm going to ask the same question one more time, just in case there was a truck going by at certain points, just to kind of get some more thoughts again. Describe to me a battle of that time, the sights, the sounds, what someone would see in type of warfare of that period.
Yeah. The Battle of Point Pleasant was precipitated by the Shawnees. The column of Virginia soldiers was coming up the Kanawha, reinforced by frontiersmen, but there was a military order and regiment that was part of the Virginia forces coming up. The Shawnees were trying to make a dawn attack to scatter that army. For the Shawnees, it was a guerrilla war. For the Virginians, it was, much more in the style of European war. The battle, the carnage was not that great. It wasn't as great as the battles in Ohio, but it did scatter the Shawnees, and the Virginians were able to call up on reinforcements from the Tidelands, and in fact did march into Ohio and try and wreak vengeance. Didn't entirely work. Sugden has a good description of the battle, by the way. In Blue Jacket.
What's that?
In the book Blue Jacket, he's got a good description of the battle.
Look for that for factual.
Yeah, and I think that's where I got the idea of Cornstalk's voice booming over the battlefield the whole time, right, encouraging his troops, trying to hold them together. Well, Cornstalk was the reluctant leader of the battle. He was not a military leader. So that's right.
Pick that up.
Cornstalk was not a military leader. He was a leader concerned with social issues. What are we?
The battery. Just switch your battery off on this, okay?
This podcast is a companion piece to the original feature-length documentary film from 2011 of the same title. If you're enjoying this podcast, we encourage you to see the film that started it all by visiting www.eyesofthemothman.com.
You're about to tell me about Cornstalk's voice.
Cornstalk was not a military leader. He was concerned with social issues and the welfare of the community, but he was pressured by his warriors into taking a leadership role at the Battle of Point Pleasant. And there are stories of his booming voice, because he was an orator, resounding over the battlefield during the course of the battle, urging his people on. And that's what a lot of Shawnees still remember, that even when he was in a position that he found untenable, he did the best of his ability.
Just tell me about the outcome of the battle of Point Pleasant. Was it a fair fight? Was it one-sided? Who lost?
No, it seems to have been a skirmish. I mean, it wasn't decisive. The Virginians rewrote the PR after the battle and made it decisive, but my sense is it wasn't decisive. If it weren't for the fact the Shawnees were scattered afterwards, I think they would have been able to make a go of it for a while longer. And, of course they did in Ohio, and later were very involved in the crushing of the 1st and 2nd U.S. armies. By that point, Cornstalk was murdered, but Blue Jacket had come to the fore at that point, and then after Blue Jacket, Tecumseh.
That's good. Can you talk a little bit about the casualties suffered on both sides in front during the Battle of Point Pleasant?
There were Shawnee casualties, but the bodies were carried off the battlefield, so I don't know how many were killed. My sense is it wasn't a large number of people. Although the one casualty everybody remembers is Tecumseh's father, who was killed there. And which helped to fuel his own, resentment at the Americans. On the Virginia side, of course, the biggest casualties were was the exploding of the powder magazine, where I think many of the bodies were later interred. There's a marker to it somewhere right in the middle of the battlefield.
I don't think.
What's his name? Lewis's brother was
General
killed.
Lewis, right?
Yeah, his brother was killed with the powder magazine.
After the Battle of Point Pleasant ended, where Cornstalk settled? What was Cornstalk's life after the battle?
Cornstalk went back to his home on the north side of the Ohio.
After the battle ended.
Sorry. After the battle, the Shawnees retreated across the river. Most people went back to their homes. Cornstalk went to his home in southern Ohio. He was near his relations. The Grenadier squaw was his sister. And I should point out that one of the things that is so distinctive about the Ohio River tribes, especially the Shawnees, is they had parallel chiefs of both men and women. Everybody knows about North American Indian chiefs being men, but the Shawnee had parallel war chiefs, men and women, parallel civil chiefs, men and women. And I have the sense that Cornstalk's sister was a civil chief, although she too took an active role in the Battle of Point Pleasant.
That's great. I didn't hear that. I've never heard that.
No, it's one of the most distinctive things about the Shawnee. Absolute gender equality.
Lord Dunmore, it's been kind of understood that he kind of was trying to use Cornstalk as a pawn to kind of cause feuding between kind of white settlers and Native Americans to kind of deter away from the reality of like British rule, kind of deterrence. Can you talk a little bit about that, about the Cornstalk being manipulated?
Lord Dunsmore was high-handed in everything that he did. He sent someone to occupy Fort Pitt for the Virginians when it clearly was British territory. He had agents working among various native people. He certainly tried to turn Cornstalk to his side, but Cornstalk was a diplomat and so was willing to talk to Dunsmore, but I don't have the sense of him being, turned to the dark side or overly manipulated.
Speaking about Lord Dunsmore a little more, can you just talk a little bit about kind of the lying, the manipulation, the treachery going on, or the politics of the battle behind the kind of, the bottom line of what some of the realities of what was really going on?
Well, what was one of the strongest motivations for the Virginians, and especially Lord Dunsmore, was this sense of noble privilege. He was a member of the British nobility, not high-ranking, minor, but he had the sense of British privilege. And he tried to, he imposed it on Virginia because it was already a royal colony, but he tried to impose it on the larger area, especially in the Ohio River Valley, to really establish a noble fiefdom in the area until the Americans ran him out.
And I had heard that Cornstalk was kind of tricked. At some point, he had thought that a militia had been sent to sign a treaty with him, when the reality was they were there for war. And that kind of threw him off guard, put them at a disadvantage. Are you familiar with that?
No,
No,
no, I don't.
Okay, just a few more.
Doesn't dredge up anything, although it seems perfectly plausible.
Right? Do you know a little bit about Dunmore's kind of ulterior motives of kind of brewing this kind of hatred between the white man and the Native Americans?
Well, it was, but what he was doing was fermenting local disagreement in order to impose noble rule or royal rule, noble privilege. He was out to establish royal privilege in the area, and stirring up the locals and having them squabble among themselves only furthered his aim.
We say that again. Can we start with what Lord Dunmore was doing, and then go into that? And then at the end, if you could tell me, was he successful at what he was trying to do there? As soon as that's gone, and we got one more question after that, and we'll be right on time.
Good. If we don't have a big enough map for the lecture tonight, it's going to be dicey.
Is that okay though?
Yeah, that's fine. It's great. Yeah.
Dunmore's kind of ulterior motives, they brewed some hatred between colonists and Native Americans, his ulterior motives. Tell me about that, and tell me if he was successful.
Up until the time of the American Revolution, each one of the colonies had its own charter or its own legal basis for existence. Virginia was a royal charter. Dunsmore was himself noble. He was trying to advance the notions of noble privilege and establish that as a force in the Ohio River Valley. He encouraged squabbling among local people because that advanced his own cause. He also encouraged disagreements among neighboring colonies. At that point, it was Virginia to the north and Maryland to the south, as a way of, again, advancing his own cause. And he was making headway, but then the American Revolution began, and he managed to escape on a boat to England. So he never suffered any of the consequences for his maneuvering just before the American Revolution. And often the Battle of Point Pleasant is now interpreted as the first battle of the American Revolution, not Boston, but the Ohio River Valley.
How did Cornstalk finally die? What happened? Was he set up? Was he betrayed? And was it an honorable death? And if not, the kind of unfortunateness about such an honorable man dying in an unfortunate way that doesn't fit the character for who he was.
Cornstalk was a hostage. His son later joined him. Other Shawnees joined him, supposedly under safe conduct and protection at the local fort. A local massacre of white people occurred, and people involved in that and their neighbors, in fact, attacked Cornstalk in the room, killed him, his son, other Shawnees who were there at the time. It was an ignominious end that he had nothing to do with, and had to do with a false sense of justice on the part of the local Americans.
I'll ask you.
All right,
It's our last question in the plane, so
Yeah,
let's ask you again.
Cornstalk went to the local fort to, in fact, deliver a message. He was restrained, arrested, what have you, but took upon himself the honorable role of hostage. Later, his own son voluntarily became a hostage. There was a massacre of local whites, and the locals in the area took their revenge by attacking Cornstalk and the other Shawnees in the room and hacking them to death. It was an ignominious end for a man of great nobility.
I think that's it. Do you think there's anything knowing the kind of subjects I'm talking about, is there anything you think I left out that you want to mention?
Well, just that the Shawnees had a very complex organization. Helen mentioned 5 separate divisions. There were probably more like 6 separate divisions. Each one had a specialty. And what's driving us crazy is none of us can remember which division Cornstalk belonged to. But the Kishpoko was Tecumseh's home group, and they were the warriors for the Shawnee nations. But I think it's Makochi, but I'm not positive. And they were in fact the diplomats. So Cornstalk, if he in fact belonged to that division, had a double reason for being a calm, reasoned diplomatic leader.
With that, let me ask you one question involving it. What kind of people were the Shawnee known for?
Or are.
Still are,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
There are some tribes, Native Americans, that were known as warring tribes, some more peaceful. What type of people were the Shawnee?
The Shawnee are known as great defenders of their tradition. To this day, they maintain their own religion under great criticism from local Baptist neighbors, as you can imagine. And they are regarded throughout North America as the great upholders of Native tradition. The old ways, as people say. Their language is in better shape than most other languages because they use it in their rituals. Their sense of community is also much stronger than other Native peoples. Of course, they were forced out of Ohio into Kansas, and now the vast majority who are federally recognized live in Oklahoma. And each has their own ceremonial space.
That's it for the questions.
Good.
Can I get one shot of you? Just sometimes it's kind of standard just to get a shot of the person you're interviewing, kind of just walking like without a
Yeah. I always have my hand. I'm always picking my nose.
Yeah, let's get one of
Okay.
you coming out of the school. I'll just let you.
The education building.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Eyes of the Mothman, the podcast. For more information about our program, or to find out where you can watch the original documentary film or purchase a limited edition signed DVD copy, please visit www.eyesofthemothman.com.